In the Summa Theologica, Thomas Aquinas offers 5 arguments for the existence of God. And so far on this channel, we've covered 3 of them. But I've got to say that of all Aquinas' arguments, the one we're going to talk about today is probably the most confusing. So don't be surprised if you get to the end of the video and you still have questions. I'm not going to try to give a full defense of the argument in this video. That would be too much to do. But I am going to try to give a brief outline, a basic sketch, so that in later videos, when I explain some of the more technical parts of Aquinas' metaphysics that he's using here, you can understand that in the context of this argument and really get a grasp of what Aquinas is trying to say. So I hope you'll find this helpful. The most basic thing really needed to understand the fourth way is Aquinas' notion of a transcendental. So what's a transcendental? Well, Aquinas looks around a world and he notices that there are certain properties that are particular to individual things or individual types of things. So take this rock and this stick. This rock is a rock. The stick is a stick. The stick is not a rock. The rock is not a stick. This means that rockness, or being a rock, is particular to rocks, and stickness, or being a stick, is particular to sticks. That means that there are certain properties, like rockness and stickness, that are particular to certain things. They're not common to everything. But Aquinas also says that there are some properties which are common to everything. And these he calls the Transcendentals, because they transcend the categories of particular things. They're common to every category, to rocks and to sticks. Probably the easiest example of a transcendental to understand is being, because anything has being insofar as it exists. So this rock has being because it exists. This stick has being because it exists. Even though they're different things, one's a rock, one's a stick, they both have being. And this is true about anything that exists. Being is a transcendental. It transcends particular categories like rocks and sticks. Same with goodness, because a thing is good, Aquinas argues, insofar as it exists. Anything that exists is, in a sense, good. So goodness transcends particular categories. The same is true with truth. A thing is true insofar as it exists. So truth transcends particular categories. Truth is a transcendental. And there are other transcendentals out there, but I'm not going to focus on those right now. Now, the second point we need to talk about, what Aquinas really takes as the fundamental starting point of the fourth way, is the idea that anything which is a transcendental needs to come in degrees because it's a transcendental. So take this rock. This rock, like we said, has being because it exists. But this rock has less being than, say, a dog, because the dog can do things that the rock can't. The dog can walk around and wag his tail and bark and climb up on the couch. The rock can't do that. The rock just kind of sits there as a rock. But so the dog has more being than the rock, even though the rock has being. But the dog has less being than, say, me, because I can do things the dog can't. I can think, I can talk, I can grasp immaterial concepts. The dog can't do that, and the rock can't do that. So being comes in degrees. The same is true with the other transcendentals. Truth, for example, comes in degrees. The easiest way to show this is with a statement. The sky is blue is a more true statement than the sky is green. Or goodness. Goodness comes in degrees. If I run into a burning building to save a child, that's a more good act than not running into a burning building, which is itself a more good act than setting the building on fire. Goodness, truth, being, all the other transcendentals too, these come in degrees. And here's the interesting part. What Aquinas says is that everything that comes in degrees requires an objective standard. So if we're going to say that Bob is 6 feet tall, we're making an objective claim about the height of Bob and comparing it to other people and other things that are a certain amount of feet tall. So that means we need an objective standard, the foot, to say how tall Bob is compared to other people. In the same way, if we're going to say I have more being than the rock, or I'm more good than the rock, or I'm more true than the rock, that means that we have to have an objective standard we're measuring these claims against for the claims to mean anything. And this is really where the fourth way becomes more of a family of arguments instead of just a singular argument. Because we could break this down and we could come at it from different angles. So we could say that since being comes in degrees, there must be a objective standard for being, just being itself, that we use to say this thing has less being than this thing. We're kind of when we do that, when we say this thing is less being than that thing, we're comparing them to this ultimate sense of being, this being itself. So there must be something that's being itself. And we could do the same thing with the other transcendental. We can look at truth and say this statement is less true than this thing. And when we do that, we're comparing them to this ultimate explanation, this ultimate understanding of truth itself. Same with goodness. When we say this action is more good than that action, running into the burning building is more virtuous, more good than not running into the burning building. That means that there is goodness itself that we're using to say this is good and this is less good. So we can take the different transcendentals and say all of them need to have an objective standard since they come in degrees. So there must be an objective goodness, an objective truth, an objective being. And then we didn't talk about these, but an objective beauty and an objective unity. So there must be a thing which is all good, a thing which is all true, a thing which is all beautiful, a thing which is all one. It's perfectly simple. Or a thing that is being itself. And since Aquinas will say that the transcendentals are interchangeable when push comes to shove, they're just different ways of looking at the notion of being, then these things must all be one. And if these things are all one, that means that it's the same thing, which is being itself, goodness itself, truth itself, beauty itself, perfectly simple and perfectly existent, or perfect being. And if that's the case, then everything that exists, insofar as it participates in these transcendentals, insofar as it's measured up to these transcendentals, in a sense, derives its existence from these transcendentals. So this one thing which encompasses all of the transcendentals in perfectly, which is this ultimate embodiment of all the transcendentals, what it is to be good, what it is to be beautiful, etc. This thing is the source of all that is. So this thing must be God.